In a courtroom in a big city, Judge Robert sat solemnly behind the bench, his face serious, his eyes sharp as if they could burn through any opposing arguments. In the formal atmosphere of the courtroom, a heavy tension weighed on everyone present. Robert was presiding over a case involving a black man named Marcus. Marcus was accused of participating in a robbery in a poor neighborhood. All the evidence was vague and unconvincing, but to Robert, this was just a case that needed to be handled quickly and under control. Robert sat on his chair, firmly striking the gavel. He could clearly feel the disdain in the eyes of those directed at Marcus. Robert's education had taught him to separate personal feelings from legal decisions. Deep down, he did not hold black people in high regard, but Robert always believed that he was doing the right thing to maintain social order. In the courtroom, Marcus looked directly at Robert, his gaze calm to the point of coldness. He knew that no defense could change the outcome with someone like Robert. He knew that the result had been determined even before he was allowed to speak. In his mind, Marcus recalled the sadness, the years he served the community, all disregarded simply because of the color of his skin. However, Marcus also didn't expect that Robert's decision would completely change both of their lives. While Robert was reading the verdict, his tone was firm but full of conviction. Each word he spoke was like a hammer blow striking Marcus's life. Robert found Marcus guilty of robbery without thoroughly considering the evidence. Witness statements were ignored. Important evidence was overlooked. Robert believed that for a black man like Marcus, his involvement in the crime was certain. In Robert's mind, he imagined destroyed homes, families deprived, and felt that his decision was unquestionably the right one. Marcus felt a heavy sense of injustice, but he did not resist. He realized that, in Robert's eyes, he was just a part of a social problem, nothing more than a statistic. Marcus could feel the despair, but at the same time, there was a cold patience within him. He said nothing, simply looking at the judge quietly as he was led out of the courtroom by the police. The look he gave Robert was that of a wrongfully convicted man, not of fear, but of disappointment. After the trial, Robert returned to his office, feeling at ease for having completed yet another case. In his mind, Marcus was just a black man involved in a crime, and convicting him was only natural. Robert had no thought of reconsidering his decision. He was proud of his record of handling many cases to uphold the law, but he did not realize he was overlooking the importance of fairness and transparency in every decision. Robert believed that black people like Marcus often had a tendency to break the law and needed to be punished harshly. His arrogance and prejudice kept him from ever questioning his decisions. To him, the law was a tool of control, to prevent disasters in society, and Marcus was just another criminal that he needed to ensure wouldn't be a threat. That night, Robert sat in his office, looking at the case files still lying on the desk. He recalled Marcus's eyes as he left the courtroom, a look that was not of submission, but one that was cold and almost frightening. Robert kept reassuring himself that he had done the right thing. It was all for the safety of society. He told himself. Marcus, after leaving the courtroom, returned to his cell with a cold expression. He looked around, knowing that no one here truly understood who he was. Marcus was not just an ordinary man wrongfully convicted. He was, in fact, a senior FBI agent on an undercover mission. This mission was to expose a dangerous criminal organization operating in the city. But with his wrongful conviction, the mission had encountered significant difficulties. Marcus understood his situation well and knew that he couldn't reveal his identity. He had to continue maintaining this undercover mission despite the many challenges that lay ahead. Meanwhile, his colleagues in the FBI were trying to resolve the situation and find a way to get Marcus out without compromising the mission. He knew he needed to stay calm and develop a new plan to reach his original target. In the dark cell, Marcus sat on the iron bed, memories of his previous missions growing clearer. He had graduated from college with excellent grades and joined the FBI with a desire to make the world a better place. He had faced dangerous criminals and suffered immeasurable losses. Marcus's mind gradually adjusted. He needed to find a way to continue the mission. Upon returning to his cell, Marcus received a secret call from a colleague at the FBI, reminding him to continue the mission and maintain information discipline. The call was brief, just simple reminders, but enough for Marcus to understand that his team was still supporting him. Marcus knew that this mission would be very dangerous, but it was a responsibility he had accepted from the beginning. Deep down, Marcus knew the journey ahead would be arduous, but he was determined not to give up. He would find a way out, continue the mission, expose the criminal organization, and bring justice to those who were oppressed like him. In the quiet darkness of the cell, Marcus unexpectedly received a mysterious call from one of his trusted colleagues at the FBI. The sound of the phone ringing in the dead of night broke the suffocating silence. Marcus put his hand to his ear to listen, and the voice on the other end quickly spoke. Short and to the point. "Marcus, we're working on getting you out. Don't give up on the mission. We will support you." Though it was only a few brief words, the warmth and determination in that voice helped Marcus regain his confidence. The call was a huge encouragement for Marcus. He knew that out there, his colleagues were doing their best to get him back on the mission. Marcus's eyes lit up with hope. He needed to prepare, not only for life in prison but also for his next plan. Marcus began mapping out plans, figuring out how to reach out to those who could help him, and building trust with some inmates in the cell to ensure that he could survive and find an opportunity to escape. Meanwhile, outside, Judge Robert began to sense that something was not right. He received some information from internal sources revealing Marcus's true identity. The detailed reports about Marcus were unlike anything he had previously thought. Robert was shocked to learn that Marcus was not just an ordinary homeless black man as he had imagined. The information that Marcus had worked for the FBI, and even as a senior agent, left Robert feeling confused and bewildered. Robert spent many sleepless nights, contemplating his decision. He began to question whether he had truly done the right thing. What he had once believed in so absolutely now seemed uncertain. He wondered if his hasty decision had caused an innocent person to suffer and had affected an important mission. A part of him felt uneasy. If Marcus was indeed a senior FBI agent, the wrongful conviction would not only damage Robert's reputation but could also have unpredictable consequences for national security. Robert began to doubt the way he had approached the case, questioning whether his prejudice and bias had completely influenced his decision. One morning, Robert received a phone call from an FBI agent. The voice on the other end was stern and authoritative. "Judge Robert, we need to meet with you to discuss Marcus's case." The meeting took place in Robert's office. Two FBI agents appeared with serious expressions, placing classified documents about Marcus on the table. They explained to Robert about Marcus's undercover mission, that he was a senior agent working to expose a dangerous criminal organization. Robert was stunned. He couldn't believe that the man he had just sentenced was actually an agent working for the FBI. The truth hit his pride like a hard blow, forcing him to question the decisions he had made. Robert sat silently, listening to the information from the FBI. He could feel their disappointment in his decision. The detailed documents, the evidence showing that Marcus had nothing to do with the robbery he had been convicted for. Judge Robert realized his serious mistake and began to feel regret. He didn't know what to do to fix this error. After the meeting with the FBI, Robert could no longer focus on his work. Every time he looked in the mirror, he saw only a man burdened by his mistakes. Sleepless nights were spent thinking about Marcus, about the look of disappointment Marcus had given him during the trial. He questioned whether he was still worthy of being a judge, a representative of justice and fairness. Robert decided to begin a personal investigation into Marcus. He searched for information, spoke to people who knew Marcus, and gradually learned more about his life. Marcus was not a homeless person or a delinquent as Robert had thought. He was someone who had dedicated himself to society, a talented and courageous agent. The more Robert learned about Marcus's contributions to the community, the deeper his regret grew. Robert began to realize that it was his own prejudice and narrow perspective that had led him to make the wrong judgment. He had allowed his bias to cloud his reasoning, ignored important evidence, and failed to fully listen to Marcus's defense. Robert's mind was torn between what he had once believed and the harsh truth he now faced. Robert knew he had to do something to correct his mistake. But that path would not be easy. He had lost faith in the system he had dedicated his entire life to protecting. But Robert was determined to find a way to make amends and help Marcus complete his mission, even if it meant facing unforeseen dangers himself. Robert could not sit idly by and watch the consequences of his own mistakes unfold. He had endured too many sleepless nights, with each tick of the clock tormenting him, reminding him of his errors. At this point, Robert's sense of compassion began to rise, urging him to act and try to remedy what he had done wrong. Robert decided to seek out his old friend John, a skilled lawyer and someone who had always fought for social justice. John was the only person Robert trusted enough to share his worries. When Robert arrived at John's office, he found his old friend deeply focused on reading documents. Hearing Robert's footsteps, John looked up, his eyes showing surprise. Robert was not someone who easily sought help from others. After Robert recounted the entire story, from the trial to discovering Marcus's true identity, John sat in deep thought. He never imagined his old friend would find himself in such a difficult situation. John knew that for Robert to make amends, he would face many obstacles. But he also understood that this was an opportunity for Robert to learn to reflect on himself and overcome his prejudices. "We can start by reinvestigating the case. I'll help you find the evidence we need," John said to Robert, his eyes full of determination. Robert felt an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time in many days, he felt like there might be a way out of his mistake. In the cell, Marcus was also constantly preparing for his next move. He knew that his arrest and conviction were not merely coincidences. Marcus suspected that the criminal organization he was investigating might have orchestrated everything to stop him. This organization could have infiltrated law enforcement agencies and manipulated the entire system to keep their operations safe. Marcus began building trust with some of the inmates. He knew that if he wanted to escape, he needed allies. Marcus found a man named Victor, who had been imprisoned there for many years. Victor was someone with influence in the prison, and Marcus knew that with Victor's support, he could find a way to escape. Initially, Victor wasn't interested in Marcus, but when Marcus shared his story and true purpose, Victor began to respect him. Victor understood that Marcus was not just an innocent man wrongfully convicted, but also someone fighting for justice and public safety. "I'll help you, but you need to follow my lead. Escaping from here is not going to be easy," Victor said to Marcus, his eyes showing determination. Meanwhile, Robert and John began working together. They went through every document, every piece of evidence that Robert had overlooked before. Robert gradually realized his mistakes in handling the case. Not only had he ignored important evidence, but he had also been influenced by his own biases. John used his connections to reach out to people who could provide information about the criminal organization Marcus was investigating. They discovered that this organization had an incredibly complex network and might have bribed some officials within the judicial system. John also realized that this case wasn't just about one individual. It was about an entire system of corruption that had infiltrated public institutions. Robert began to feel the danger of this investigation, but he knew he had no other choice. He had wrongfully convicted an innocent man, and now he had to do everything he could to make it right. Robert and John started planning to expose the truth, even though they knew it could lead them to face unforeseen dangers. In the prison, Marcus and Victor devised a bold plan to escape. They decided to take advantage of an upcoming event at the prison, where inmates would be allowed out to the yard for a communal activity. This was the only chance they had to reach the emergency exit without being closely monitored. Victor had carefully scouted the guard routes in the prison and identified the time when the guards would be least attentive. Marcus and Victor prepared everything they needed. from gathering simple tools to break locks to finding ways to distract the guards. They knew that even the smallest mistake could get them both shot on sight. The day of the escape arrived, and Marcus and Victor stood in the yard with the other inmates. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He knew this was his only chance. When the signal was given, Victor started a small scuffle to draw the guards' attention. Meanwhile, Marcus quickly moved toward the emergency exit. Everything happened in a whirlwind. Marcus could hear the shouting of inmates, the blaring of alarms echoing everywhere. Victor soon followed Marcus after creating the distraction. The two ran through narrow hallways toward the emergency exit. With the tools they had prepared earlier, Marcus and Victor broke the lock and made it outside. Outside the prison, a car was waiting for them. It was part of the plan Marcus had arranged with the support of the FBI. As the car door closed and the vehicle began to move, Marcus breathed a sigh of relief. But he knew that the real fight had just begun. He needed to complete his mission, expose the criminal organization, and prove his innocence to the public. The car sped down the deserted road, Marcus and Victor sitting in the back, both panting after their dramatic escape. The light from street lamps flashed through the windows, illuminating brief moments in the night. Marcus looked out the window, his mind tense but filled with determination. This was not the time to relax, as he knew they would be pursued immediately. The driver was an FBI agent named Sarah, assigned to support Marcus in this covert mission. Sarah didn't say much, her eyes focused on the road ahead, her hands gripping the wheel firmly. "We'll get to a safe place first, then figure out the next steps," Sarah said briefly, her eyes never leaving the road. Victor glanced at Marcus, then at Sarah. He was accustomed to the harshness of prison life. But now, sitting in this car, he felt that their battle was far from over. Victor was not someone who easily trusted others, but he knew Marcus was a man of ideals, and that was what made him decide to follow him. The car stopped at a small house in the suburbs, in a quiet area with little traffic. Sarah quickly guided Marcus and Victor inside. "We'll stay here for a while, until things calm down," she said. The house was small but equipped with everything necessary for hiding out: computers, maps, and communication tools with the FBI. Marcus looked around the room, knowing that their time here wouldn't be long. He needed to quickly find a way to continue his mission. He turned to Victor, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for helping me, but this journey is going to be long and dangerous. You don't have to continue if you don't want to." Victor laughed, his eyes shining with determination. "You got me out of that hellhole. I'm not going to abandon you now. We'll fight together until the end." Meanwhile, at John's office, Robert and John were continuing their investigation into the criminal organization. They had reached out to some old friends in the field, people who also had doubts about the judicial system. A few of them agreed to help, providing information and assisting Robert and John in accessing classified documents. Robert began to realize that he was not alone in this fight. Former colleagues, people he had worked with, were also starting to question the transparency of the system they served. They decided to form a secret investigative group, with the goal of finding evidence of the criminal organization's involvement in manipulating the judicial system. In a secret meeting, the investigative team discussed their new findings. One of them, David, a skilled data analyst, had uncovered unusual financial transactions involving high-ranking officials in the judicial system. Large sums of money had been transferred into the accounts of certain judges and prosecutors, suggesting that corruption might have spread more widely than they had imagined. Robert listened to this information, feeling both horrified and determined. He knew that what they were doing could put them in danger, but he also knew that this was the only chance to correct his mistake and get Marcus out of his wrongful situation. John placed a hand on Robert's shoulder, speaking with confidence. "We won't stop until the whole truth is exposed." In the small house, Marcus, Victor, and Sarah began planning their counterattack. Marcus knew that this criminal organization was not only powerful but also had a vast network. and they would not easily let him go. He needed to gather enough evidence to expose them, and to do that, he had to return to the starting point, the place where he first discovered traces of the organization. Sarah opened a large map, marking the locations Marcus needed to go. She explained, "We might be able to get information from your old contacts. One of them might still have important documents." Victor looked at the map, then at Marcus. "We don't have much time. We need to move quickly." They decided to split into two groups. Marcus and Victor would head to an old area where Marcus had once worked and might find some leftover information. Sarah would stay at the house to monitor the situation and be ready to contact the FBI if needed. Each of them knew that the upcoming journey would be full of danger, but none of them showed fear. As night fell, Marcus and Victor left the house. They took an old car, avoiding major roads to stay unnoticed. On the way, Marcus couldn't help but think about his friends and colleagues, those who had sacrificed themselves for justice. He knew that this mission was not just about saving himself, but also about bringing justice to all those who had trusted him. Marcus and Victor arrived at an abandoned complex on the west side of the city, a place Marcus had once used as a temporary base during his previous investigation. The area had been deserted for a long time, with dilapidated buildings and streets littered with debris. The cold and gloomy atmosphere of the place made Victor shiver. Marcus led Victor into an old building, walking carefully over shattered glass and damaged walls. "This is where I first gathered information about the organization," Marcus said quietly, his voice reflective. He remembered the long nights spent working in the dark, trying to piece together fragments of a bigger picture. They moved into a small room at the back where Marcus had hidden a box containing important documents. When Marcus opened the box, he found papers, photographs, and notebooks he had collected. Victor looked at the documents, his eyes becoming serious. "This is everything we need to start the counterattack," Marcus said, his eyes gleaming with determination. But as they prepared to leave, Marcus heard footsteps from outside. He signaled for Victor to stay quiet. Both of them retreated into the shadows, holding their breath. The footsteps grew closer, then stopped right in front of the door. Marcus could feel his heartbeat pounding, each second feeling like an eternity. The door burst open, and a group of strangers entered. They were armed, their eyes revealing danger. Marcus knew these were the henchmen of the criminal organization. They had tracked him down. Victor grasped Marcus's hand tightly, bracing for the worst, but Marcus had no intention of giving up. He looked at Victor, gave a small nod, and the two prepared for the upcoming fight for survival. Meanwhile, across the city, Robert and John were working tirelessly to gather more evidence. They knew time was running out, and that Marcus was facing imminent danger. Robert made a promise to himself that he would do everything he could to right his wrongs, even if it meant risking his own life. The sound of footsteps made the atmosphere in the small room stifling. Marcus and Victor held their breath, eyes focused on the door, ready for a fight. When the door burst open, the dangerous faces of strangers appeared. Marcus realized these were the henchmen of the criminal organization who had been hunting him for a long time. Marcus looked at Victor, his eyes filled with determination. Victor understood the signal. He crouched down, ready to defend. One of the strangers stepped in, his gun pointed straight at Marcus. "You thought you could escape, Marcus?" he said, his voice mocking. Marcus didn't reply, his attention solely on their every move. In an instant, Victor lunged like a fierce tiger, knocking the gunman backward. The scene became chaotic, with shouts and the sound of breaking objects echoing around. Marcus wasn't idle either. He quickly moved forward, disarming another thug. The precise and powerful blows Marcus delivered left the henchmen flustered. After a few minutes of chaos, Marcus and Victor had taken control of the situation. They tied up the remaining men but knew they couldn't linger any longer. Marcus took some important documents from the box and signaled Victor to leave the building. "We have to go now. They'll call for backup soon," Marcus said urgently. They hurried out of the abandoned complex, disappearing into the night. Marcus knew this was only the first step in the long battle against the criminal organization. But he wasn't discouraged. Beside him, Victor, his unexpected ally, who had helped him through countless challenges, had now become more trustworthy than ever. Marcus and Victor returned to the safe house where Sarah was waiting. As they entered, Sarah saw their sweat-covered and dusty faces and knew that the situation had escalated significantly. "We don't have much time left. They'll find this place soon," Marcus said, placing the stack of documents on the table. Sarah quickly began to examine the documents Marcus had brought back. They contained information about the organization's financial activities, including a list of bribed officials. She flipped through each page, her eyes growing tense. "We can use this to prove their involvement," she said with determination in her voice. Victor sat down in a chair, exhausted but with a bright determination in his eyes. "We need to get these documents to the FBI as soon as possible, before they find us," he said. Sarah nodded, knowing that every moment was now precious. Marcus looked at Sarah and Victor and said, "We're not going to stop at just handing these documents over to the FBI. We're going to use them to expose the whole truth and reveal everyone involved." He knew that his mission wasn't just about protecting himself, but about bringing to light the wrongs he had uncovered. Sarah began using the computer to send the information to the FBI. She encrypted the important documents, ensuring that only authorized agents would be able to decrypt and read them. Sarah knew that sending this information would draw the organization's attention, but she had no other choice. Meanwhile, Marcus and Victor continued preparing for a potential attack. They reinforced the door and set up barricades at the entrance. Marcus didn't want any surprises. He and Victor checked their weapons together, ready for another confrontation if necessary. Sarah successfully sent the information to the FBI and received a confirmation signal from them. She turned to Marcus and said, "The FBI has received the information. They'll take action. But we need to stay safe for the next few hours until they get here." Marcus nodded, feeling a slight sense of relief. But he also knew that the situation wouldn't be that easy. The criminal organization had already shown that they had power and influence, and Marcus knew they wouldn't stop until he was eliminated. That night, when everything became quiet, Marcus, Victor, and Sarah sat in the small house, trying to stay silent and listen for any movements outside. Each second passed as if it lasted forever. All three of them knew that danger could strike at any moment. Then, around midnight, noises began outside: footsteps, murmurs, and the sound of metal clashing. Marcus signaled for everyone to stay quiet, and he moved quietly to the window to peek through a crack. Shadows of people were approaching. It was clearly the henchmen of the organization. They had found the safe house. "They're here," Marcus whispered, his eyes resolute. Sarah and Victor grabbed their weapons, ready for the fight. The door was slammed hard, followed by shouts of orders. They wanted to capture Marcus and eliminate anyone who stood in their way. The gunfight began. Marcus and Victor fought together against the attackers. The sound of gunfire echoed harshly in the small space. Sarah, with the precision of an agent, fired accurately, not allowing any of them to break in. Everything unfolded like a nightmare, but Marcus did not allow himself to be defeated. He fought with all his strength and determination, knowing this was his last chance to protect the truth and those he loved. Victor fought beside Marcus, his eyes filled with bravery and courage. After a long while, the gunfire subsided. The organization's henchmen were either eliminated or forced to retreat. Marcus looked around. The house was now full of bullet holes, but the three of them were still safe. Sarah panted, looking at Marcus and Victor. "We need to get out of here now. They'll come back with greater numbers." Marcus nodded, knowing they didn't have much time. They had to keep moving, to find a way to bring the evidence to light and finish the mission he had started. He looked at Sarah and Victor, his eyes filled with determination. "We won't stop until all the truth comes to light." After leaving the small house, Marcus, Sarah, and Victor decided to head north, where there was another FBI safe house prepared for emergencies like this. They got into a prearranged vehicle, with Sarah behind the wheel. In the dark of the night, they sped away, leaving behind the threatening sounds of the recent attack. Sarah focused intensely, her eyes tense but still shining with determination to get her team to safety. Marcus sat in the back seat, looking out the window, his mind filled with thoughts about the battle they had just fought. He felt exhausted, but he could not let that fatigue defeat him. Marcus knew that their mission was far from over. Victor sat next to Sarah, his eyes fixed on the map in his hands. He guided Sarah through small roads, avoiding crowded areas to stay under the radar. The atmosphere in the car was tense. Each of them carried their own worries, but they shared the same determination: to bring the truth to light and dismantle the criminal organization. After several hours of driving, they arrived at a dense forest, where the safe house was hidden. The house lay deep in the woods, surrounded by trees and complex terrain. As they entered, Marcus felt a bit of relief. This was a place where they could be temporarily safe and plan their next move. In the small house in the forest, Marcus, Sarah, and Victor sat around the table, discussing their counterattack plan. They knew it was time to not just defend but to go on the offensive to expose this criminal organization. Marcus spread out the documents he had gathered on the table, pointing at the names and numbers. This organization has a vast network and has deeply infiltrated the judicial system, Marcus said, his voice serious. We're not just dealing with street criminals. We also have to confront high-ranking officials who have been bribed. Sarah looked at the documents, her eyes full of determination. We need to gather more evidence, especially to identify the head of this organization. If we can expose him, we can bring down the entire system. Victor agreed. He knew that the organization was powerful, but he had faith in Marcus and Sarah. We'll need support from the FBI. If we can get this information to people we trust, they can help us, Victor said. Marcus nodded. But first, we need to figure out who we can trust. This organization has infiltrated so deeply, and we can't risk handing over information to people who might be compromised. The three of them worked together to draft a detailed plan, from contacting allies within the FBI to gathering additional evidence. They knew that this mission would be extremely dangerous, but none of them had any intention of backing down. While Marcus, Sarah, and Victor were planning, Robert and John, on the other side of the city, were also continuously investigating and searching for evidence. They had managed to contact several agents within the FBI who shared the same goal and determination to expose the truth. One day, Robert received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, a worried voice spoke. "This is Agent Miller. I have received information from Sarah. I want to help you bring the truth to light." Robert was surprised but also very pleased. This was an opportunity to get more support from the FBI. Miller explained that he knew about Marcus's situation and wanted to assist. "I can arrange a meeting with Marcus and his team. We need to work together to expose this organization," Miller said. Robert agreed and informed John about the meeting. They knew that contacting Marcus directly was very risky, but this was an opportunity for them to act together and strengthen their fight against the criminal organization. The meeting was arranged at a secret location in the forest where Marcus, Sarah, and Victor were hiding. When Robert and John arrived, they saw Marcus standing there, his eyes filled with determination. This meeting was not just about exchanging information but also about building trust among allies. In the house in the forest, Marcus, Sarah, Victor, Robert, John, and Agent Miller sat around the table, sharing information and planning together. Miller brought confidential documents from the FBI, information that only high-level agents could access. These documents showed the extent of the criminal organization's infiltration into the judicial system and the people involved. Robert flipped through each page of the documents, his face showing clear anger and disgust. He couldn't believe that people he had once trusted were involved with this organization. "We need to make everything clear to the public," We can't let these people continue to get away with this, Robert said, his voice filled with determination. Marcus looked at Robert, knowing that the change in Robert's perspective was a major step forward. The judge who had sentenced him was now on his side, fighting to expose the truth. This gave Marcus more hope for the future. John and Miller analyzed the information they had together. They decided that the next step would be to contact a trustworthy journalist who could help them make these pieces of evidence public. They needed to ensure that all the information was exposed to the public so that no one could hide the truth. The day to expose the truth finally arrived. Marcus, Sarah, Victor, Robert, John, and Miller prepared everything together. They had contacted a well-known journalist who was willing to help them publicize the entire affair. The journalist promised to reveal all the information they provided. Regardless of the risks, they decided to choose a public location for the announcement, so that no one could stop them. The location was a large square. With the presence of many people and the media, Marcus stood in front of the crowd, holding documents that proved the truth about the criminal organization and those involved. Sarah and Victor stood beside Marcus, their eyes full of determination. Robert and John were behind them, ready to protect Marcus if any threats emerged. Agent Miller and some of his colleagues were also present, ensuring the security of the announcement. Marcus began to speak, his voice ringing out powerfully across the square. He talked about his journey, what he had discovered, and the corruption within the system that the criminal organization had infiltrated. He revealed documents proving the involvement of high-ranking officials, calling for public attention to the fight against this corruption. The crowd fell silent as they listened to Marcus, then erupted in cheers of support. The truth had come to light, and now no one could hide it. The media immediately began covering the story, and images of Marcus, along with the documents he revealed, flooded television and newspapers. Robert looked at Marcus, his heart filled with admiration. He knew that Marcus had done what very few dared to do: stand up against injustice and fight for the truth. John placed his hand on Robert's shoulder and said quietly, "We did it, Robert. The truth is out." Marcus looked at Sarah and Victor, then at Robert, John, and Miller. He knew that this battle wasn't over, but it was a major step forward. They had exposed the truth, and now it was time for justice to be served. Marcus felt a sense of relief, and for the first time in many days, he could smile with hope for a brighter future.